In the community of Panama alone, 13 people have been killed, and they haven't been published because we're afraid. Not because of the land, but because of the assassins who are out there killing in sand gulchas and all over the place.
On Wednesday, Honduran Campesinos from the Agrarian Platform called on President Xiomara Castro to honor an agreement signed 3 years ago to stem the violence against campesinos in Bajo Aguán. The land conflict has for years epitomized why Honduras, according to Global Witness, is one of the most violent countries on the planet for environmentalists. I'm Roman Gressier, the editor of El Faro English. It's Friday, February 14th, and this is Central America in Minutes.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
globalism comes to die at CPAC, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes on El Faro English.
On January 31st, 2 members of the Gregorio Chavez Cooperative were murdered in Bajo Aguán, a valley dominated by palm oil monocrop. Weeks earlier, on Christmas Eve 2024, the Camarones, Tranvío, and Chile cooperatives were forced from their land, the Agrarian Platform denounced, totaling 150 families. They also report 200 murders of campesinos in the last decade in the region. The Studies for Dignity Law Office named the criminal group Los Cachos as carrying out violence designed to, quote, impose terror, according to Honduran outlet Criterio. The Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras, COPIN, ties the violence to private security companies connected to the Honduran agro-industrial corporation Dinant. Dinant's plantations are concentrated in Aguán. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights expressed concern on January 27th for the violence against Honduran campesinos and called on the Honduran state to quickly find those responsible. In November, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights identified paramilitary groups in the area. Last October, freelance reporter Jared Olson reported for Manga Bay that a Delaware court approved a settlement between the World Bank lending arm, the IFC, and land defenders attacked by security forces, allegedly linked to Dinant. They agreed to $5 million in reparations without the World Bank acknowledging liability. Dinant responded to the article that they respect human rights and, quote, remain committed to the well-being and prosperity of the communities in which they operate, close quote. In February 2022, the Honduran government signed an agrarian agreement promising to address the, quote, structural causes of the Bajo Aguán conflict, including an agrarian reform to address the recovery of land, reparations and access to justice for victims, identifying and punishing those responsible for violence, and providing protection for affected communities. The government has not yet installed a promised truth commission to get to the bottom of it all. Human Rights Minister Angelica Alvarez told Honduran digital outlet Contracorriente that 11 police officers have been wounded in confrontations with armed groups there. Security Minister Gustavo Sanchez has called the situation on the ground, quote, complex. Human rights lawyer Joaquin Mejia noted that Honduras has not implemented a constitutionally mandated agrarian reform. In Tegucigalpa on Wednesday, campesino collectives towed a line of criticism while extending an olive branch in addressing Castro, whose party Libre, like the Honduran opposition parties too, will hold internal elections on March 9th. We remind you, the organization said on Wednesday, that your election generated hope for a government of refoundation. That's why we call on you to honor your commitment and historic mandate for campesino families to live in peace, free from violence, and with dignified access to land. Next, we move to Nicaragua, where state media outlet El 19 Digital headlined on Wednesday, quote, volunteer police sworn in as defender of peace and common good in Matagalpa. The new constitution approved by the Sandinista-controlled legislature provides for the creation of an armed parasecurity force apart from the armed forces and national police. But Ortega has dragged his feet for 2 weeks and has yet to sign the new constitution, which would create the new force. That didn't stop the regime from swearing in the parasecurity force in Matagalpa. The ceremony was led by senior regime officials, including First Commissioner Francisco Javier Diaz-Madriz, Director General of the National Police, and Colonel Osmin Edgardo Garcia, Chief of the 6th Military Command. Exiled attorney Yader Morazan wrote on X that multiple judicial officials took the parasecurity force oath, donning a black ski mask, including a Matagalpa judge. He wrote, "It doesn't matter if the legal text calls them archangels, paramilitaries, paratroopers, reservists, or volunteer police. A delinquent is a delinquent, and the simple fact of belonging to a criminal group not acknowledged by law is a crime." Close quote. State security and paramilitary forces were instrumental to Ortega and Murillo's repression of 2018 protests that have become the subject of an international arrest warrant in Argentina for Ortega, Murillo, and a dozen other top officials for crimes against humanity. As we covered in episode 11, the accusations under universal jurisdiction include over 350 murders, as well as torture and forced disappearance. The new constitution enacts sweeping changes to the Nicaraguan political system, installing de facto Vice President Rosario Murillo as an unelected co-president, amid months of speculation about the health and mental acuity of Ortega, who this year will turn 80 years old. The new text, pending Ortega's signature, also declares the Nicaraguan state to be revolutionary and socialist, and establishes the ruling party FSLN flag as a national symbol. The flags were flown at the swearing-in of the volunteer police, of course. Poet Gioconda Belli, a former Sandinista who was stripped of her political rights by the regime, wrote in an op-ed in exiled digital outlet Confidencial that Murillo, quote, fears a military rebellion post-Ortega. She added, to counter this, she constitutionalizes a quote-unquote voluntary paramilitary army. This force, loyal to her, will be well-funded, ideologically driven, and trained by the military or by those who participated in the deadly repression of youth in 2018. Never in the history of Nicaragua, with its 11 constitutions, Belli concluded, has one been crafted with such shamelessness to suit the convenience of a married couple. Last, we turn to El Salvador. In a hushed reform on January 29th, the Bukele-controlled legislature approved major changes to his signature 2021 Bitcoin law, striking any mention of Bitcoin as currency and prohibiting the state from accepting Bitcoin for taxes and other payments. This was an explicit part of the negotiations for debt relief with the International Monetary Fund, worth $1.4 billion, as we previewed in episode 9. Gone are the days when Bukele mocked the IMF online for criticizing his Bitcoin project, even as top Salvadoran officials sought ways to revive the talks. On Wednesday, following suit, the Inter-American Development Bank announced that they will seek to support a, quote, dynamic private sector and a favorable public sector environment, with more than $1 billion in financing for 2025. Count on us, wrote President Ilan Goldfein, former president of the Brazilian Central Bank. The Bitcoin reform was tucked into a crowded slate of legislative motions on the same day that the legislature pushed through the most dramatic change to the Salvadoran constitution in decades, allowing a single legislature dominated by a single party and controlled by the president to enact future constitutional changes at will. But the next day, at a Bitcoin conference in San Salvador, Ambassador to Washington Milena Mayorga seemed eager to pretend nothing had happened. As El Faro editor Nelson Rauda reported in a new chronicle in El Faro English, Mayorga told attendees, including prominent Bitcoiners who moved to the country in 2021 and helped write legislation under which they would purportedly operate, that El Salvador is, quote, Bitcoin country. We're adopting Bitcoin. We have a special law, she said. You can go and buy a hamburger with Bitcoin anywhere. President Bukele is buying 1 Bitcoin every day. By the Ministry of Tourism's own admission, only 0.7% of registered businesses accept the cryptocurrency, which, for one survey, 85% of Salvadorans did not use in 2023. Applying even more spin, Mayorga added that Bukele, quote, has the personality to challenge the economic banks, even the IMF. For more, read Rauda's new piece at elfaro.net/en, Faithfuls cling to Bitcoin country after IMF deal nixes Bitcoin. Thank you for streaming Central American Minutes. I wrote today's episode with production and original soundtrack by Omnion. El Faro English translates Central America. You've probably heard us say it enough. You can support our work every month by going to support.elfaro.net and joining our crowdfunding community. Our mantra is simple: journalism must go on. We'll be back next week.